So, I figured I would do a historical discussion thing. So, that historical discussion is going to be about slavery. So, this is a problem that I have with, let's just say, a common position people take. So, this is a common position that as people take. This is actually recording. This is usually right wingers say it, but whatever. I'm in a kind of conservative part of my neighborhood right now, so I don't know. But we got that out of the way. So let me just get to what I want to talk about. So this is the argument that I see. Slavery wasn't that bad, or it is or they say it's to downplay it in some way, because the Europeans bought slaves from other Africans, or the Africans that they enslaved were already slaves. This is true. Many of the Africans that were bought by the Europeans and brought to the Americas, in the transatlantic slave trade, were already slaves that were owned by African slave traders. This is because, well, there'd be internal conflict and stuff. Members of certain tribes, maybe in Central Africa, maybe even as far as East Africa, they would be captured and they would be brought over, to the West Coast as slaves. Now, the thing about this though is that there were, but just a small number of the actual slaves were actually just like just stolen off the shores, but that was a comparatively small number to the amount that were bought by Europeans. However, the fact that many of these slaves were already slaves, or were already enslaved by other Africans, changes about the badness of slavery. Right, this changes. You know how much this changes? That it changes literally nothing. I mean, it's not like the Europeans had a gun pointed to their hands and were forced to buy the slaves. They bought slaves because, they went over to America, enslaved all the indigenous people, killed way too many of them due to disease and shit, and they're like, oh, we need a new source of labor. Let's go to Africa and slave some African, or buy some African slaves. And that's essentially what happened. So the fact that Africans were already, the African slaves were already owned by other African slave traders changes literally nothing about the discussion, in my opinion. Maybe you can find some justification for that, but I think it changes literally nothing. Okay, so another argument I want to run through is, this is a very common one. It's that, this is actually a really common neo-Nazi one. It's that, it's slavery. Okay, so it's that the Irish were slaves, and they were treated, and sometimes they were treated much worse than the Africans for a longer period of time, and the Irish got over it, so the Africans should, or the black people should get over it too. So here's the problem with this one. Irish were not slaves, but they were what we would call indentured servants. Now, indentured servitude is similar to slavery. It's even abolished in the 13th Amendment along with slavery. However, there are some key differences between indentured servitude and slavery that make the two things quite different. So, first off, indentured servitude was generally for a short amount of, not a short amount of time, but it was for a specific length of time, whereas slavery was for life. Indentured servitude was pretty much like you would go to the New World or whatever. You would probably have some type of you'd have some kind of like labor job, and you'd work there for a specific period of time, I think even also you could be a prisoner, and this would be some type of punishment for it. But you would go to the New World for usually the Americas, maybe probably like the United States. So you would go there for a short period of time, and you would work there, right? So at the at the end of your and don't get me wrong, indentured servants, which were usually treated not really greatly, but you know, it would be for a short, maybe like 10 years or so. And another thing, so after the end of your indentured servitude, you could be given you could be given a plot of land, some sort of, land to farm on. You might be given, no, you may be given some compensation, like some money. That's one of the things that makes indentured servitude different from slavery. Indentured servitude, in fact, if the indentured servant had been mistreated quite cruelly by their master or whatever, whoever held the contract at the time, as also the contract could be traded between people. But if they were treated quite cruelly, the indentured servants could go to the courts and have the contract abolished, or not abolished, maybe annulled, just like scrubbed out. They could have, they could do that. Another course of action that they could do was that's pretty much it. And I think third thing or third or fourth, whatever, that is the difference between the slaves and indentured servants, was that that an indentured servant's kid would not be born an indentured servant. However, kids who were born kids of slaves were always born slaves. They would be born slaves, and they would likely live, and if it's early enough in the history of slavery, die as slaves. They would not be born as free people with rights and such. So those are generally three differences between slavery and involuntary and indentured servitude. But indentured servitude is, of course, still bad. Like I said previously, it was abolished with the 13th Amendment. You can't do indentured servitude anymore. You can't be an indentured servant and the like. I probably had some other ones I want to run through, but I can't remember right now. I just want to say that maybe expand on something. A lot of people try to say, "Oh, white people were slaves. White people were slaves." White people were never necessarily slaves in the Atlantic slave trade. This is, of course, a myth, usually taken from the Irish slave myth. Although, also, you have to keep in mind, Irish were treated quite badly in America in this time. Otherwise, there was a lot of anti-Irish sentiment, which kind of stems from the British anti-Irish sentiment. It also comes from a lot of anti-Catholic sentiment at the time. That was pretty heavy, because of how heavily Protestant the culture was, especially in America. But the Irish, the white people were never slaves in the Atlantic slave trade. You could find white people, or Europeans, whatever, be slaves in certain, like the Barbary slave trade, around like North Africa. You could see you could see Europeans and Africans be slaves in that. I have to do more research on the Barbary slave trade. That is something people, I think, I've occasionally seen neo-Nazis try to use to also downplay transatlantic slave trade. I have to really do more research onto that. But yeah. So essentially, to recap this video, the common myths I see are that, or things I see that try to downplay slavery are that, is that the slaves that were bought from, that were taken to America were bought from other Africans, and that the Irish were slaves, and of course, the rebuttals to this is that the fact that these African slaves were bought from other Africans changes nothing, and that the Irish weren't slaves, indentured servants, and all the reasons I listed. That changes, that makes a difference between that makes a difference between slavery and indentured servitude. And that's all I have to say. Have a good one. Bye.